All right, it is high noon on the first Tuesday of the month, so we'll get started. I'm Britin Bostick. I'm the Downtown and Historic Planner for the City of Georgetown, and joining me, as usual, is Ann Evans, one of the librarians at the award-winning Georgetown Public Library. We're really excited to bring this presentation to y'all today, so if you're watching live with us on Zoom, welcome. If you're watching on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us on social media. We'll be able to take questions when we finish the presentation. So if you have anything you'd like to ask us, please feel free. You can also do that in the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. Nat Wagner, the Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Georgetown, is producing our webinar this afternoon, and Nat's available to help out if you just want to chat him if you need any assistance. So, Anne, thank you so much, as always, for being our expert in history, especially in Georgetown history, and provides a lot of the photos that we show y'all in these presentations. And so I always appreciate her willingness to give us a great glimpse into our past. And we wanted to do something a little bit fun. A lot of us are still staying at home, still wanting to stay safe. Some people's travel plans just haven't really been able to happen this year, this summer. And we're getting into a season where fall starts make you, if you've been in Georgetown for very long, fall can kind of start making you think about fun things like our Christmas stroll parade or like Halloween trick-or-treating. So we wanted to have a look at what did people in Georgetown do in the past. We wanted to show you some parade photos that we really, really love, historic parade photos that also show our historic buildings. And then we wanted to highlight some places that you may not know Georgetown residents spent a lot of their recreational time in the past. So this is kind of a fun presentation for us, and we always like to show things that we hope are kind of surprising. So the first parade that we have pictures of is from 1902 or around 1902. These photos were taken by a woman named Annie Wittenberg, at least that's what was written on the back of the photos. And they're showing Gentry's trained animal parade. There are some what kind of look like miniature horses. There are some elephants. We had elephants on Main Street in Georgetown in 1902.
An elephant named Pinto.
With the name Pinto, Pinto and Little, I think. And so,
yes.
Did we have a circus here? Were these circus animals? Did the circus come to town, or how did we end up with elephants on the square?
So it was really common, just like today, for us to have traveling circuses, and oftentimes they traveled on railroads. And that's actually where the story of the Hutto Hippo is that one time in Hutto, a hippo escaped from the rail car while they were taking a break, and they had to say, "Stop trains, hippo on the loose." So it was common for animal shows and circuses to come through towns. And of course, they're doing a little parade here. A fun side note is Annie Wittenberg is actually becomes Mrs. John Sharp, who was the owner and editor of the Williamson County Sun for much of the first half of the 20th century.
Okay.
But she always, in all of his archival materials, always wrote her own name to make sure you knew she was the one that was documenting this, not her husband.
How funny. So these might have been published in the paper, and I haven't looked back in the paper that far, but she might have been taking these to put in the paper, or might have been doing this to document basically what would have been kind of a big bit of news.
Yes, exactly. Something exciting coming to town.
Great. And I think it's important to note, if you don't recognize the courthouse behind the animal parade, that is the 4th Williamson County Courthouse. So that was the courthouse that was there around this time period. It was replaced in 1910 with the courthouse that we have today. So this is a much more Victorian looking courthouse. It was really tall. It was really beautiful. It also kind of a combination of not great things. It was too small ultimately, and was replaced with the larger courthouse we have today. And I think you said it may have had some problems.
It did have some problems. In fact, it was deemed unsafe for most of the 30 years it was in existence. They had issues with stairwells. They had issues with the walls. All sorts of different things caused problems in there. So it's a lot of people get really sad to think, oh, but it looked so gorgeous. Why was it gone? But the people of the time were very happy to see it gone.
And then we have this beautiful courthouse that we have today. And if you missed our presentation last week, it was designed by an architect named C.H. Page, who was a really well-established and well-known architect in the state of Texas who did a lot of governmental buildings. So if you missed that presentation, you can see it online. Go to historic.georgetown.org, scroll down just a little bit and click on the link for past presentations. And you can see our September presentation where we talk about the courthouse a little bit, because it's the same architect designed our current courthouse as designed the historic Georgetown High School on University Avenue. And so these are some of our favorite parade photos, and mostly because there are some sassy little girls who decorated their bicycles in these photos.
Yes. And my also personal favorite is the young, I think, gentleman riding off in what appears to be an Uncle Sam costume in the back of the photograph with Berna Cook, which is in front of where the fire department, where the Georgetown Art Center is now, which was the fire department and City Hall at different times. So these are, early 20th century. And we know that at several points in time in 1908, 1909, 1913, Southwestern tried to start a May Fete or a May Day festival. And it kind of took off and started and had some stops and starts to it initially. Although some of the early ones, including the one in 1909, attracted over 1,000 people to Georgetown.
Wow.
So quite a few given the town size at the time, and they became kind of little spectacles. But May Fete actually became a Southwestern staple with, if the next slide is this woman, whose name is Laura Kirkendall. And in 1915, she began a regular May Fete celebration in Southwestern. And she began as a teacher of expression in the fine arts, hence the photo. That's pretty dramatic. But by 1918, she had moved to Dean of Women, a role which she continued until her death in 1935. And she wrote her master's dissertation on women as students, including aspects such as their mental health, their sexuality, touching on a lot of things that were taboo at the time. And she really believed that the function of the Dean of Women was to help girls come into proper realization of the truth of significance of their spiritual welfare, and that the girl of the 20th century has come to claim the birthright that is her own. She will be led and guided, but it is my view she will never be dictated to again. And so the original May Fete celebrations were these kind of celebrations of women. They involved processions and a lot of dancing and a lot of course, pageantry. But it very quickly turned into a 2-day event involving the entire town and involving parades downtown, people coming to Southwestern, younger girls getting involved in the dancing. I think you can see on the next screen, next slide, yes, they're dancing around the maypole. You can see girls of all ages, and of course there's a large crowd that's gathered. It continued through World War I, and it had a victory pageant actually in celebration of World War I that Governor Hobby, the governor of Texas, actually attended with his wife. So it became that large of a festival. And it really did continue until her death in 1935. And after that, it continued in some way, shape, or form. Some different aspects of it continued really until the 1960s. So it became this really kind of staple of Georgetown for a good chunk of the first half of the 20th century.
This looks like something out of a movie. I have a hard time picturing this as Georgetown, but we think that this was probably on the Southwestern campus.
We think so, yes. That seemed to be where they usually ended up. And a lot of the early May Fetes were pretty contained to Southwestern, but it quickly continued to grow.
That sounds like a fun tradition. So if anybody's interested in bringing the May celebration back with the big maypoles, let us know.
We'll be into it. They're really hard. Have you ever had to dance around a maypole?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's very difficult and you can get very tangled. It takes a lot of coordination. So that makes this photo even more impressive to me. That they're not all tangled.
I'd probably have been the kid kind of that got a little bit out of sync with everybody and ended up kind of getting wound around the pole. But this is, it really looks like it's out of a movie. This is such a fun photograph. And it's fun to know that we were celebrating springtime and that there's a tie to Southwestern there. You can kind of see in the photo, a lot of women are wearing hats and looks like hats with floral decorations. I see what look a little bit like sailor costumes. Dress that we would expect from much earlier in the 20th century, along with all of these white dresses that the girls are wearing. So how fun. And then the parades continue. We love a parade downtown. We always have.
And we do think these are also probably Mayfet parades and floats that everyone is getting involved in the town, and of course decorated completely with flowers.
And so it looks like these may have either been families or organizations. It's a little bit hard for me to tell. It looks like in the photo on the left, it's a bunch of younger women in white dresses, but in the photo on the right, we've got children. We also have what appear to be African-American gentlemen leading the horses, which is probably to make sure everybody's safe. And so if we have any information, we don't know who these people were, but if anybody's got information on who some of these people may have been, let us know, because we're very interested in who our early parade goers were. But sometimes when we have these photographs, we don't have notations on who the people in the photo were. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but particularly these kids in these very well decorated wagon that's covered in flowers. That looks like kind of a very fun ride to take in a parade in the downtown. So Nat, you mentioned, Nat just sent me a note and mentioned that we've got a question. So Nat, do you mind letting us know what that question is? We can go ahead and answer it, because I think it was relevant to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, we have Stephen on the line through Zoom. Stephen has asked about the streets that you were showing. I would ask Stephen if he has any further clarification on that, but I think it was early on in the slides that y'all were presenting. Stephen, are you there?
Yes, I was wondering if that was Main Street or 7th or 8th or one of those.
Oh, back with the courthouse. So this is based on the buildings I can see in the background. This would be Main Street on the east side of the courthouse, where the elephants are and where the horses and the carriage are. So that's going right, I say up Main Street kind of toward the San Gabriel River. And then in the second set of photos, the Berna Cook photo from 1908, this is right at the intersection of Main Street and 9th Street, East 9th Street. This is right in front of the building that today is the Georgetown Art Center. But at the time, this was the City Hall and the fire station. And one of the reasons it's really hard to recognize is, A, those are dirt streets, and we don't have any curbs, and we don't have any paving, and we didn't have sidewalks. It was just buildings and dirt. And then there's this really large, dark portion of the photo behind Berna Cook. That is the 100-foot tall, 20-foot diameter steel water tower that no longer exists. It was taken down in the 1960s, but from the very late 1890s, I think sometime around 1894, I'm a little blurry on the date, but I think from 1894 to about 1960, maybe 1962 or 3, maybe the late 50s, there was this massive 100-foot tall steel water tower in downtown Georgetown that kind of was a really prominent feature, and that we don't have anymore, but it appears in some of these older photos. And it's really helpful to us because it can act as this kind of wayfinding device as we try to figure out where some of these photos were taken. And that water tower was so prominent, it helps us see that a lot. The girls on the bicycles in front of the fence, I'm not totally sure where that was. Do you know, Anne, where that might have been?
I'm not entirely sure either. I would suspect it's somewhere further down Main Street where they start to get to residential areas. One, because of the trees that are still planted nicely in rows, and also two, because that's where they would be heading.
That makes sense. So, and then this photo we think is on the southwestern campus. I suspect that it may have been where the lacrosse fields are today, although that used to be a football field. That was Southwestern's first football field, and then they didn't have a team or a field for about 50 years, and then now they have a field on the other side of campus. But what we know today is the lacrosse field at the corner of University and Maple used to be a football field in a big grassy area, and so there's a possibility that that's where these maypoles were set. So Good questions. And then where we have the carriages on the photo on the left with the young ladies and the African-American gentleman leading the horses, that is on 8th Street, right in front of the buildings that are on the south side of the square, because we can see the Farmers Bank building, which is now the Williamson Museum in the very back left. And then the pictures with the kids, somewhere in Old Town. I don't know exactly which houses those are, but we can see the picket fence. And so somewhere probably kind of close to Main Street or maybe kind of close to Southwestern. Great questions. Speaking of streets and orientation and knowing where we are, this is a photo. This is the first time I've seen this photo. And thank you so much, Anne, for sharing this. Because this is a photo showing a lot of our African-American community in front of the building that we know as the Strongberg-Hoffman building, but which is also home to Barrels and Amps. And so y'all might be familiar with that. It's right there. This is on Austin Avenue, and the street that's right on the left side of the photo that people are standing in front of is 8th Street. So we're at the corner of Austin and 8th, and we're looking west. And so we can see a lot of African-American residents gathered here. Why were they here, Anne? And why? It looks like they were watching a parade, but what
They were.
Photo?
So one of the reasons I wanted to share this photo is because it's one of the few photos that shows us what's happening with the African-American population in Georgetown during these festivals and parades. This is part of a scrapbook from Southwestern that was circa 1910 to 1915. And all of the photos around it are, of course, of the Mayfete and the parades and things like that. So this student actually turned and took a picture of the African-American population. Whether they were forcibly segregated or self-segregating, it's not clear, but they were kind of grouped together there observing the parade. And so we don't have a lot of documentation what's going on with people of color in Georgetown at this time. So it's a great photograph. And if anyone out there has any more that they would like to share or stories they'd like to share, we would love to have those.
I think it's really fun if you see the children are sitting. This is where we do have a street curb, and it's a pretty tall street curb. And it looks like it made an excellent seat for the children in this photo. You can see a lot of boys sitting on the street curb, and I'm sure they were kind of impatiently waiting for the fun to start.
Sorry, go ahead.
What a great photo, and also helps us see how people were dressed at the time. And I would have had to be a person with an umbrella because I tend to sunburn pretty easily, but this is, we watch parades today, stand out in the sun, we line the street corners and the curbs in downtown. And so it's so fun to see the things that are similar to 100 years or more ago that we still enjoy those things today. Or at least we're really looking forward to enjoying them once we can have parades again.
Once we can. That's what I was going to say is actually my favorite person in this photo is the woman underneath the umbrella, almost right in the center. She seems to be the only one that's realizing a photograph is being taken because she's smiling in a white dress.
And she is posing really, really well for that photograph.
Yes, she is.
But I think you're right. She must have noticed that the camera was on them and posed accordingly. So what a beautiful photo. But little kids weren't the only ones who enjoyed a parade. We have some ladies really dressed up for these parades.
Really dressed up and really advertising local businesses. So we sometimes think that it's a newer trend to advertise your business in a parade. No, it's been going on for centuries. So of course we have the Price Brothers, which was a grocery store, and the City Ice and Bottling Works float, which is that kind of higher up photograph. You can't really tell, but the ice wagon is kind of right behind it.
Okay.
And these are from the Firemen's Parade, which was another parade that really kind of defined early Georgetown in the early 20th century. And we have several accounts of it. People really enjoying it, looking forward to it. They had a fire queen, and it would do a parade, and then they would have a giant picnic out at Katy Lake.
That just seems so fun. And that also is just a lot of dressing up. I don't think I've ever looked that fancy in my life. So Price Brothers, one of the fun things that I get to do occasionally is look into the history of buildings and try to understand. Sometimes people are asking about what businesses were in a building. Sometimes they're trying to understand what changes a building has had over time. So the Price Brothers in particular, if y'all are familiar with the businesses on the square, they were located about this time. I believe they were located in the building that now houses Handcrafts Unlimited. It's called the Booty Building. And so that's what Price Brothers was advertising in this parade photo. So we don't see that building behind these women. So they would have been kind of in a different part of the square than where Price Brothers was located. But those are some helpful clues that we sometimes use when we're doing research to try to connect all the dots, is using buildings in the background and also trying to understand the relationship that businesses had to the buildings. And then, like I said, this advertising that Ann's really wonderfully pointed out. Advertising in parades isn't something that we've done recently. It's something that we've done, now we know, for over 100 years. So it's amazing how things change, and it's amazing how things stay the same. But we've got this really great photo on the left showing that unfortunate courthouse that got replaced by the one we have today. But it looks like the ladies weren't the only ones to get dressed up. Are these Georgetown firefighters from back in the day?
These are the Georgetown firefighters, Fire and Rescue,
Awesome.
which was a volunteer fire department at that time. And so it's their parade they're doing.
Really
and
like
then
their
of course,
hats.
I do too, yes. They have some fabulous hats, and they always look very spiffy in their uniforms as well. But you can tell that the parade continued for quite a while because, of course, you pointed out we have the fourth courthouse in the background of the fireman photo. But in the lower photo, that's a photograph of a boat and the fire queen, the fireman's parade queen. We have the fifth courthouse. So you can tell that it's spanning quite a bit of time here. And then we continue going on. We don't actually know what the bottom left photograph is from, but it looks like they're gathering for a parade. And if we had to guess, it will probably be the firemen's parade. And again, you can kind of tell there's spiffy uniforms, all in white there.
So if you're not, if the photo on the left looks a little bit unfamiliar to you, that is the east side of the square around the turn of the 20th century. If you took all of those awnings off the buildings, you'd probably have an easier time recognizing things, but that's where the Williamson County Sun is. That's where All Things Kids is. That's where the Escape is. And so you have to look a little bit closely, but those are the buildings. And then the Dimmitt building back there on the corner of 8th Street and Main Street. And this is a photo that didn't quite catch that really tall water tower that I was talking about earlier. And this also makes Main Street appear to be super, super wide. But at the time we didn't have paving. At the time we didn't have all the parking spaces striped. And so it's a little bit different look. And also I think the courthouse lawn has extended out a little bit since this photo was taken. The photo on the upper right is on East 7th Street. That's showing along the north side of the square. So in the background, we can see the buildings that are today Queenan's Jewelers and then also Mesquite Creek Outfitters. And so those buildings definitely look a little bit different because those buildings have changed over time, particularly the building that Queenan's Jewelers is in there on the corner. That building got a stucco coating, the upper windows got changed. And so some of these older photos of activities in Georgetown can really help us to understand how buildings have evolved over time and to see what they look like more originally. But there is another little element of construction that Ann wanted to show, which is really fun. And let me see if I can, there we go.
There it is. So yeah, in the upper right photo, you can see there's something constructed coming out of the porch of the courthouse, and that is a bandstand. And so there's a lot of counts of bandstands being constructed on the courthouse porches, but this is the only photo I know of one that exists. The largest bandstand I know that was constructed actually occurred during World War II, and it was to welcome Eli Whiteley home. He is the only Medal of Honor winner from Williamson County during World War II. And so they actually welcomed him home with this huge parade and a giant band, and they constructed the largest bandstand that I've heard of on the courthouse lawn.
So do we know about what year these were? Because I think the photo on the left may have been around that 1908 time period that we seem to have a lot of parade photos, but the one on the right looks a little bit later.
A little bit later. So we know it's still pre-1922 because the streets aren't paved. But of course, now we have an automobile. So it's probably late teens, early 20s.
That's really fun.
Kind of using those context clues of things that we know to try to date it.
Sometimes historic research involves a little bit of guesswork and a lot of comparing to other things. And it would be so handy, and maybe remember this, if you want people to know who was in the photo and when the photo was taken, you might want to pencil it in on the back so that
Yes.
when historians are looking at things in the future, they know where things came from and when they were taken.
Makes our life easier.
Yes, exactly. So you talked about Katy Lake, and this is so fun for me because Katy Lake isn't something that we enjoy today the way that it was enjoyed in the past. And you were saying the Firemen's Parade ended up at Katy Lake. And when I'm thinking Katy Lake, I'm thinking Lake Georgetown. I'm thinking like really large man-made lake that also supplies the city's water. But this is a whole different endeavor.
Yes.
So, and we talked about this back in May in a previous webinar, but if you want to remind everybody what Katy Lake is, because this is just really, really fun.
Yeah, so Katy Lake was actually a little mini resort, a small lake built by the Missouri Katy, the MKT Railroad to encourage people to come to, it was kind of between Georgetown and Weir. So to encourage people to come, spend their money, spend their time. It had all sorts of recreational activities. It had boats you could rent, you could buy food, you could swim, you could do all sorts of different things. You could hunt, you could fish. And so the firemen's picnic would actually end up at Katy Lake, and they would have women and everyone would just bring food and set out a huge buffet and all enjoy it during the course of the day. So that's kind of where it ended up.
And it looks like in this photo on the right that Katy Lake was maybe also a place one would go courting.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, you take your date out for a whole day, right?
That's really fun. I'm very interested in these boats and canoes. Some of them seem to be really low to the water.
They do.
A little haphazardly, but it also looks like a lot of fun. And I'm glad we have these photos. And just what a fun picture of the way that we used to enjoy the outdoors. We're gonna switch back to downtown. So these are some photos that are on a website called the Portal to Texas History. It's an online collection of a ton of photos that come from the Texas Historical Commission. They come from museums, they come from private collections. There's just a great wealth of photo and other document resources. So you can go to just Google the Portal to Texas History. If I'm looking for Georgetown things, I usually just search Georgetown, Texas. That doesn't bring up absolutely everything because it all has to be tagged specifically, but that's where I found these parade photos. This is from Georgetown Centennial Parade. So we were founded in 1848, and in May 1st, 1948, we had the biggest parade downtown, and you can see that. We had cars lined up, we had people lined up. We had people standing on canopies of the buildings on the square. And so what we're looking at in the big photo on the left, this is Main Street. This is the east side of the courthouse. The courthouse is just out of view on the left. And you're seeing that same set of buildings that we have today, with a notable exception. In the very background, you can see a tall, large building that has a triangle at the top of it. That's the OddFellows building, and that's a building that is no longer there. That that got kind of redone as the Georgetown Public Library, which became city council chambers. And so that has been owned by the city of Georgetown for a while. And so if you're kind of, things don't look quite the way that you know them, that's a big reason why. But I love, love, love these photos. One, because everybody's clearly just so excited and about to enjoy this parade so much. But also we have a really great view of our square in 1948. We also have a really great view of the signs for a lot of the businesses. And we have some really interesting parade floats. So in the photos on the right, you can see the building in the background is the really beautiful building at the corner of 8th and Main Streets. And then you can see part of a sign on the far right of that photo. That's where the Walgreens was. And so that would have been a drugstore downtown with their neon sign. I really love that sign. And then we see the OddFellows building, more of a close-up. It's a really large building. So if you're not familiar with the OddFellows, The Masonic Lodge was right across the street where Gumbo's is now. And so the OddFellows were kind of another social lodge. And the OddFellows also had the Oddfellows Cemetery down 7th Street on the east side of town. And that's where a lot of notable people in Georgetown's history are buried, in the Oddfellows Cemetery. And so there was just a lot of kind of social activity around that. We'll get into that in a later presentation. But here is the City of Granger's float. And it's really fun. A lot of the floats look like that. A lot of other cities put floats in Georgetown Centennial Parade, kind of as a measure of support, also as a measure of supporting their and kind of advertising their cities. But if you look at the buildings in the background, it's one of the reasons I love this photo. We have people hanging out of windows. We have air conditioners hanging out of windows. We've got glorious business signs. These are so fun. You've got the Williamson County Sun with a neon sign. And the people standing on those canopies is just really not something that we would recommend doing.
No.
Please don't stand on building canopies. It's not terribly safe, but some of the floats give you an idea of what people dressed like in 1948, what was important to us in 1948, how we designed floats in 1948. And this next photo, the bigger photo, is also one of my favorites because this gentleman is pushing a plow with a kind of poster painted cutout of an ox showing the old way while he's also being pulled by a modern tractor. And so saying in 1848, we used to use plows and oxen to farm, and now we're using tractors. And so I think that's just a really fun way to look at the past. And we're also, again, seeing people sitting on canopies, hanging out of windows, watching the parade every which way that they can. And then probably one of the more accurate historic replicas is the Williamson County's first courthouse parade float, showing that our very first courthouse, we've had 5. And so our very first courthouse was in a log cabin sort of on the east side of the square, although that's a little bit nebulous. And then we've got some really fabulous Southwestern ladies there in the bottom right photo, riding in a convertible.
Yes, and I wanted to point out we have a oral history of this that says the parade was opened by a bunch of people driving wagons down Main Street and then ending up in the park where they had a shootout.
Oh my gosh.
So there's actually an account from a man named Frank Hausenfluck that when he was a kid, he remembers doing that, and he remembers that he had opened the shotgun cells to take out the lead, but noticed that he shot once or twice and nothing was coming out. And he was amazed that he didn't blow himself up. And of course, then I was probably part of Georgetown because the paper wadding was stopped up in the barrel. So he didn't blow up a shotgun at the Centennial is one thing that we know happened.
So just always take good safety precautions when participating in parades. And wow. So people were having a lot of fun. It was a really exciting day, except maybe people got a little bit too excited. With their shootout exercise. But this does hopefully give you a really good glance of the businesses downtown, the signage downtown. And so when we're looking back at our history, these photos, again, can just be really helpful to understanding that. But something that we may be a little more familiar with today, our Christmas stroll has a parade with it. A lot of you may have gotten dressed up to be in the parade or really enjoyed watching the parade. And I love the little girl that's wrapped in the box with the bow. She just looks like this is the moment of her life to be in this parade. And that's pretty much how I feel every time I get to walk in a parade. I'm really happy to do it.
So this year would be the 40th year for the Georgetown Stroll. One thing people may not realize if you haven't been here since the early 2000s, they've been doing the stroll parade in the morning, on the Saturday morning. However, prior to that, they actually did it the Friday night. So it was an evening parade. So that's why those are kind of dark. And it looked a little bit different. A lot of people I grew up with remember walking in the parade at night and how it was just so cool because you got to usually use light up things of some sort, which you don't get to do in parades normally. But just kind of showing you how far we've come. We don't know exactly what year these photographs are from. So if anyone has any idea or recognizes anyone, let us know, because that will help us fill out, again, that writing on back of photographs thing, that we like to know these things for the future.
And then our Red Poppy Parade. So we've got our wintertime celebration, and that is matched or exceeded by our springtime celebration as the Red Poppy capital of Texas and our Poppy Parade. And so we see, again, there's this over 100-year history in Georgetown of people lining the sidewalks in downtown to enjoy a parade. And I love that so much. I love that we're connected to our history in that way, and that the things we enjoyed so much are some things that we continue to enjoy today and are looking forward to being able to enjoy when we're able to do that again.
Exactly.
And so we're gonna, so those are our parades, moments of time that our city was celebrating and joyous, but we have other reasons that our city celebrated, and a lot of those took place in parks, in parks that we either have in a different way today, or parks that we used to have that aren't there anymore. And so one of the big celebrations in Georgetown was the celebration of Juneteenth. And so if you're not familiar with Juneteenth, it's June 19th. It's a celebration of when the information was kind of brought to Texas of the emancipation of enslaved persons in 1865. And so that is a really important holiday. It's an important date to note for a lot of Texans. And that was something that was celebrated here in Georgetown at what was called, was it the Carver Park? Help me to understand.
Was at the Carver Park, yes. So it was the Carver Park. So Juneteenth is still celebrated. It's been continuously celebrated in Georgetown. And I say continuously because we know it was celebrated before. We're in like our over 60 years of continuous celebrations that are documented. But we know it was celebrated before. And if anyone has photographs or documentation of how it was celebrated before in Georgetown, we would love to have that, especially the early 20th century. But in this clipping that we have from the paper is from 1951. So it's one of those first in this continuous line of celebrations of Juneteenth in Georgetown. And there was a parade. It was downtown. It ended up at Carver Park. Sorry, I want to say Marshall Carver, but it's Carver Park, which ended up being West Side Elementary as part of GISD once the city sold the park to Georgetown School District. And then that eventually did become Carver Elementary. And then what has been most recently is the Boys and Girls Club. So it's right there at 17th and Scenic. But it was a park where Juneteenth was celebrated with like an overnight barbecue. They had baseball games, the parade, of course, and of course their pageant and queens. So again, it's another aspect of Georgetown's parade history and park history too, that many people may not be aware of when they're driving down that way.
That's really cool. And then St. Gabriel Park and the St. Gabriel Trail System are something that we really enjoy today. Shout out to our awesome Parks Department.
Yes.
Not only do they operate our recreation center, but they also do a ton of work to make sure that we in Georgetown can enjoy these beautiful trails that we have all along the St. Gabriel River, neighborhood parks, some of the longtime city parks. And so anytime you see somebody from Parks and Rec, be sure to give them a thank you, because it's a great way for us to be able to exercise. Even during this pandemic, you have a lot of recreational opportunities in Georgetown outside, and they've also kept the rec center going and done just a really fantastic job. So the Parks Department is responsible for a lot of great work, and we really appreciate them. And one of the things that the Girl Scouts were able to do, and we talked about this being a photo that we like so much, and also something that we're just really surprised by, the Girl Scouts went camping on the San Gabriel River at a place called Lion's Head.
Yes.
And then apparently they were really adept cliff climbers.
Apparently. So one of the things that our Parks and Rec department has done is make some of these like popular longtime places that people like to go and hang out more accessible. So this is Lion's Head, which if you went to Rivery Park, kind of down behind the Sheraton and things now, you could much more easily get to than the Girl Scouts could in 1910. Another place that the trail system goes is Crockett or Night Spring, which is out on Lake Georgetown. I actually went hiking on a nice trail with my friend out there. It's a couple-mile hike. And we just kept telling ourselves every time we started to get tired that I've seen photographs of women at the turn of the century in long dresses and horrible shoes, and they made it. So I can definitely make it. So yes, so some of these popular hangouts are places we've been going for a long time, but yes, huge shout out to Parks and Rec for making them easier to get to.
That's really excellent because not only am I not a very good rock climber, but I'm not a very great hiker. And so I would need that well-maintained trail in order to do that. We have a park that has a name that you might not be familiar with. This is Chautauqua Park, and it's in a bend of the San Gabriel River. It's kind of in the northern part, the northwestern part of the Track Ridge Grasshopper neighborhood to the west of our downtown. And this is a park that today doesn't really show how it got started. And so we wanted to give you some information about a park, a city park that has this really interesting history that ties back to a social movement in the 19th century. And so the Chautauqua movement was an adult education and social movement in the US, which was highly popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Chautauqua assemblies expanded and spread throughout rural America until the mid-1920s. The Chautauqua brought entertainment and culture for the whole community with speakers, teachers, musicians, showmen, preachers, and specialists of the day. And President Theodore Roosevelt was quoted as saying that Chautauqua is the most American thing in America. And I think I've said something similar about rodeo. So President Roosevelt and I might have a little bit different view on that, but this was something that Georgetown was just kind of all in on participating. And so from what I've read, this is something that was started by the Methodists, and Georgetown has a long history of Methodists kind of starting Southwestern, and then we've got several Methodist churches. So it kind of makes sense to me that the Chautauqua movement would have been brought to Georgetown because we had such a large Methodist community. But this was really a non-denominational kind of endeavor. They did have really famous speakers that would go around. And so one of the most famous speakers in the Chautauqua kind of movement or on the circuit was a man named Russell Conwell. He delivered this Acres of Diamond speech 5,000 times to different audiences across the country. And then if you have much information about planning, or if you've ever looked much at planning history, a woman named Jane Addams, who was kind of famous for her work on social problems and housing. Jane Addams was a woman who spoke on the Chautauqua circuit too. And so that's kind of interesting for me to find out that they even had like really kind of well-known, renowned planners speaking. So it was ministers, it was kind of motivational speakers, inspirational speakers, people who were speaking on social issues of the day. And then there was also kind of a strong religious component. They would have singing, they would have different music, they would have preaching and messages. And so the picture that we have is of this fantastic suspension bridge over the San Gabriel River that would have, we believe this is the part that led up to the park. And you can see a smokestack in the background. Ann and I think that that is the smokestack from the planning department's building today, over along MLK and 8th Streets, right just directly to the west of the Georgetown Public Library. So we think this photo is looking back toward downtown. But Ann, we can see some structures and I can see some flags waving in the breeze. So those structures aren't there anymore. So what are we seeing in the background?
So one, the Chautauqua actually built a hall to host itself in Georgetown. So the Texas Chautauqua Assembly in 1888 decided to bring the Texas Chautauqua to Georgetown. So in 1889, that's when it starts here. And it could be anywhere from a couple weeks long to a month-long celebration. And so people were coming in from out of town, as well as all of local people that wanted to attend the Chautauqua, and they would be long, day-long events. So people would camp, and some of the more prominent residents in Georgetown actually built homes, sometimes only a few blocks from their actual homes, just so that they could be closer. So they could get up in the morning, go attend, and be back late at night without having to go too far away from the Chautauqua, that they could get the full experience of it.
Wow.
One thing that is actually my favorite thing is an advertisement for the Chautauqua in around 1890. And it asked ladies of Georgetown to furnish potted plants to decorate the Chautauqua Hall, and said the management will take care of them and return them when the session is over.
That's amazing.
So that's the level of involvement that you're getting from the town, is people are bringing potted plants out of their home to serve as decoration, and then camping in tents just a few blocks from their home, just so they can be involved with this movement.
So basically the whole town of Georgetown went to summer camp on the river.
Yes.
And that was something that continued for years. And then that's how Chautauqua Park has its name. And so it started out with Chautauqua, New York. The first one was held on Chautauqua Lake in New York State. So if you're curious how we got such a New England sounding name for a park in Georgetown, that is exactly how that happened. And so I really wish we had the suspension bridge back. That might be kind of challenging, especially given how the San Gabriel River is occasionally prone to flooding. But Parks and Rec, we really appreciate you. And also please consider bringing back this bridge.
We want a footbridge.
Yeah, we would love to have a suspension footbridge, please. So we had, I know we had a swimming pool in San Gabriel Park. But I found a swimming pool I did not know existed when I was doing some research on Sanborn maps. And so the Sanborn fire insurance maps lay out the city of Georgetown and a lot of detail about the buildings, the streets, some of the businesses. They make notations that can be really helpful to us when we're doing research and trying to understand how things were previously. And in these 1925 maps, I found a swimming pool. And it was a place called Goodlett Park. It was a concrete swimming pool and a bathhouse. And it was located where Hat Creek Burgers is today, right between the two branches of the San Gabriel River, kind of just up from where they come together along Austin Avenue. And in this 1934 photo in the bottom right, that is a picture of the bathhouse. And that's taken from an airplane flying over. A gentleman was hanging out of the airplane, taking pictures of Georgetown, and thankfully, he snapped a photo that included that bathhouse and swimming pool. So we know it was there as late as 1934. My understanding is that there were some remnants of that swimming pool as late as at least the 1980s, possibly the 1990s. And so that was really kind of a surprise to me and an unusual location. One of the things that Ann and I were wondering is there was a pretty significant flood in the 1950s in Georgetown. It came up really high. It did some damage to the bridges that were there at the time. And we think that maybe some of this fell victim to that flood because we believe it would have been underwater during that time. Not totally sure. That's a little bit of conjecture or speculation, but we do know as early as 1925, Georgetown residents could enjoy a swimming pool. And that was kind of an unexpected finding in our research. And you gave me a wonderful explanation of these photos, so I'm going to let you proceed with that. And it's something that I appreciated so much.
So this is just I wanted to point out, when I was going through and I was finding photographs of the stroll parades, from over 20 years ago, this is how far the lights in downtown Georgetown have come in the last about 30 years. Because I hear so many people talking about how wonderful it is downtown, how much they look forward to the lighting of the square, and just how fabulous it is. It is a wonderful thing. And it's something that we have done for quite a while, but I just wanted to point out kind of a then and now photograph to maybe make you a little more appreciative of how hard the city workers and contractors work to get the lights done for your enjoyment during the holiday season.
So the photo on the left looks like I did it, and the photo on the right shows what it's like today when the really excellent professionals decorate our trees with really good equipment. And it usually takes them a couple of weeks to get all those lights up, and it transforms our square into a Christmas wonderland. just the lights alone are enough to do it. And we love that time of year so much. So something that y'all can be looking forward to as we progress through the fall. And also stay tuned for information on holiday events. We want to make sure that we stay safe. We want to make sure that we do our best to help everybody stay healthy, but we know how important some of these celebrations are. So we're currently working, all the organizations that work so hard to make these things happen for us are currently working through details on what that'll look like for this year. So, but I'm just really glad that that's not my role in the city. It's to decorate, because you would stay with the picture on the left. And we are in the month of October, so early happy Halloween to everybody. This is a great year to be wearing masks as part of your costume.
Yes,
so that's certainly an option, but we have these throwback photos. We just really love a parade on the square. And so you can see, is this a kid's costume parade?
It's a kid's costume parade, and we have very little information about it other than it's in 1982. And then, of course, there seemed to be some sort of pumpkin carving, either contest or event, that there were just several photos of pumpkins filling up the steps for the courthouse. And my favorite one in there that you can see is E.T. right up next to the column.
That's really cute. I like the pumpkin with the bonnet, it looks like. That's kind of got some squiggly hair drawn on. So if you recognize any of those costumes or any of those pumpkins, let us know.
Let us know.
And please, on your Halloween photos, either save the file with some date and location information, or be sure to pencil it on the back if you have a hard copy. That way in the future, people can know what you were up to, and then you don't have to listen to people like Anna and I speculate on what may have been going on.
And guess what's going on.
Well, thank y'all so much for joining us. If we have any questions, we want to make sure we get those answered, but you also, if you think of something later, please feel free to contact us by emailing historic@georgetown.org, or you can call us. We have our direct lines listed there. Nat, did we have any questions that we didn't get to answer yet?
It doesn't look like it. We still have about 10 folks joining us online through Zoom, and through Facebook, we have about another 20. Happy to take some questions. Also wondering if you would, after questions, be willing to give the audience an update on the design guidelines. And I think Ann had an announcement to share as well. So if there's any questions out there, feel free to chat me, or if you want to ask those now live of Britin and Ann.
So while we're waiting, I'll just share really quick, not this Friday, but the next Friday, October 16th, we actually have a virtual webinar coming up for Family History Month at the library. It's called Roots, Records, and Research. We'll have 3 different presentations, one at 9, one at 10, and one at 11, all via Zoom, on genealogy. So beginning genealogy do's and don'ts, DNA and getting into that and genealogy, and caring for historic family artifacts with actually a conservator at the Texas State Library and Archives. So it'll be a lot of fun. You can sign up for that online at the library website, library.georgetown.org.
Oh, that's really great. Probably something that I need to attend. There's always something to learn. So again, if you have questions, please let us know. One thing that we're really, really excited to announce is that we are starting a process to update our downtown and old town design guidelines. So Georgetown has 2 established historic zoning overlay districts, which means that properties and structures within those districts have special protections and special requirements for projects, whether that's building a new building or demolishing a building or making addition to a building or changing the materials or changing the windows. And so what we want to do is to make sure that we're keeping a set of guidelines that address all of the different kinds of projects that we get. The last time we updated the design guidelines was in 2012. And so here in 2020, it's a great time to just have a look at those. And sometimes technologies change or materials change. Sometimes our development code changes, and it's great to have all of those line up. And so as we kind of continue with our historic preservation efforts in the city, the thing that we're looking at next is the design guidelines and what updates could be really helpful in those. So we're working with a consultant called Post Oak Preservation. They are really well qualified, have a lot of great experience, not only with design guidelines, but also with historic structures. They have a lot of historic tax credit projects that they've done. And so just have a lot of great familiarity with the whole process. And we're really excited to be working with them. If you have questions about that process, or if you have questions about how you can provide feedback, please contact me. You can email historic@georgetown.org, or you can call me at 512-930-3581, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. So we're kind of in the early stages of that project, but we'll be making some announcements, especially here, as we move forward with that and begin working toward a public input process, because we want to make sure we can capture comments. But if you want to do that earlier, feel free to reach out and have a chat with me. So we haven't heard any questions, and we're about ready to wrap up. Next month, we're expecting our first 2 guests for our webinar. We are going to do, we plan to do a moved house mystery. And so this is a joint effort between the planning department, the Georgetown Public Library, and Preservation Georgetown, our preservation nonprofit here in Georgetown. And it's been a team effort to figure out where a house came from, a house that we knew got moved, or we were pretty sure we knew got moved. And we've been able to uncover the story through quite a bit of joint efforts on the research. And we want to share that story with y'all. It's a really good one. And I'm so thrilled that we have permission to share that information. So join Ann and I the first Tuesday of next month at noon, and we'll be showing you a moved house mystery, and really excited to do that. So Ann, thanks so much for joining me. Nat, thank you so much for our webinar as usual. Yes. And if y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out, but otherwise have a great rest of your day and a really good October.